Hi everybody, thank you so much for the full house. Just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and thank you Creative Mornings for having me. It's a real pleasure to speak about my work, and especially here in Sydney, which is where I'm from. And thank you for the really nice introduction, Nicole. So my name is Vexta. I work predominantly in painting. My background's in street art. I'm self-taught. So I went to university, studied to become a journalist, decided not to work in the media, ended up with an arts career. So I didn't really follow a traditional path at all. And now I basically spend most of my time painting as well as hustling work. I do sculpture, I do animation, do collaborations. So my practice is pretty diverse, as well as painting large-scale murals. And yeah, currently I'm living out of a suitcase, and I happen to be in Sydney, and I have an apartment in Tulum that I haven't been in since June, and some of the time I live in New York. And so I'm here to talk to you about chaos. So basically, when I was given this topic, I thought I would let chaos guide me in my talk and just let it flow and you know, just start with the word and see where it led. Because personally, I think there's a lot of beauty to be found in chaos. And so, first of all, I started, I'm not close enough, here we go. So basically, I just started with putting chaos into the internet, or what Google says chaos is. I was like, this will be my starting point. So the dictionary definition, or the internet's definition of chaos, is complete disorder and confusion. It's basically, you know, it's that space between all the things that we don't understand. As well as what resonated the most with me was the formless matter supposed to have existed before the creation of the universe. And so that part of the definition was what resonated the most with me. So anyway, as I was saying, so I thought I would start with, we all turn to the internet for knowledge currently, and that's where we find our information. So I was like, this is where I'm going to begin. I'm just going to put in the word chaos, see what comes up. And so this is the dictionary definition, or the Google definition of chaos, which speaks about chaos being complete disorder and confusion. So it's like understanding and not understanding, and that space in between. And then, it also talks about physics and it being the formless matter supposed to have existed before the creation of the universe. And incidentally, the first Greek god was called Chaos. So chaos is like, it's even maybe the matter that existed before matter. It's the space before that. It's before atomic particles. Okay. Oh, maybe you're gonna have to click for me. So that was the line that really resonated with me as an artist, and it made me start thinking about my journey as an artist and all of the different things that have inspired me. So, as a child, I would basically spend time like floating around in my swimming pool in suburban Sydney in the backyard, and like feeling my body in the water and like looking up at the sky and wondering why, like what kept the water there, and why wasn't it flying up into the sky, and what made my body, and why didn't I disappear into the water? And then I would occasionally, that slide's not working, lie in the pool at night and look up at the stars and think about the stars in the sky and what made the stars and what brought the light down to Earth and what was the planets made from. And obviously I was studying solar systems at the time at school, and I was completely fascinated by this stuff. And I probably should have gone on to study science or physics, but I wasn't particularly good at maths and I wasn't good at science, and I tried it in high school and it didn't really work out. I was good at art and good at imagining different realities and different things to do with, our environment and how we kind of interact with the world around us. So, I went on to become an artist and to apply that kind of thinking to my work. So, Fast forward a number of years and I find myself living in Melbourne and becoming part of the street art community there. I spent quite a few years running around the laneways of Melbourne, putting up stencils, small interventions, getting involved further and further with the scene there, and experimenting more with stencils as a mark-making object. So I started to do very small pieces, and then, wanted to really take the medium and push it as far as I could. And that kind of thinking that I'd had as a child really influenced me in my work, where I was like, okay, I'm using this stencil and it's a shape, and it could be a shape used to link the figurative elements in my work. It's a shape that I can use to form my own language as an artist. So I started to work a lot with geometric shapes, and I feel like as an artist it's important to create your own symbolic language, especially when you're working visually and you're trying to work across your language barriers and cultural barriers. So for me, I worked with like the geometric shape, and I was like, this is going to be my language to talk about the way that our world's constructed. So for me, it's like the symbol of a subatomic particle or a particle that makes up all matter. So I started to like use that more and more and push that stencil to be more of a paintbrush, to take something that's like essentially like a printmaking object, which is used to, make an exact replica, and to do the opposite. So to take it and make it so it's like different every time, to use it like a paintbrush, to use it for repetition, and to use it as a symbol of matter. And click. So I basically spent a few years running around the streets of Melbourne, painting, being crazy, not expecting to have an art career, then being offered some shows, and going on to exhibit. And then I thought I would talk about, as Nicole brought up earlier, like one of my first kind of influential experiences that kind of propelled me forwards in my career, which was being invited by Banksy to London to paint for the Cannes Festival. And that's this image here, which I'd also put up a lot on the street. So it became kind of like a hallmark of my work without really like intending it to be. It just happened. So I was invited through a friend who was friends with Banksy. And at the time, I was just making art for fun. I didn't really see it as a viable career. And so I was like invited by him to come, and I was like, okay, well, I was already planning to be in Europe. So I accepted the offer, but I'd never been to London. I really didn't know what London was like. I had no concept of the scale of this exhibition. I literally rocked up with this sketch on a piece of paper. Every other person had their stencils shipped internationally and sent boxes and boxes of stuff. And at the time, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to continue doing art. And this is quite a personal piece because it was about somebody who was close to me who passed away. And so at the time I was like, I don't even know if I want to be doing art anymore. Like, I'm kind of sad. I don't know. Okay, I guess I'll go to London. I suppose Banksy's a big deal. I guess I should paint. So like, I turn up with this sketch on a A4 piece of paper. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of a big deal. So there's like 40 artists, a giant tunnel shut down in the centre of London, catering. And it definitely fits into the theme of chaos because it's quite a chaotic experience. I was like, I'm pretty unprepared. But I made my stencils, I got up there, I painted, and it was a formative experience because it was really great to see somebody's mind, such as his work, and bring people together, and for me to like put my work out there and be like, at the time I was like, okay, this is either going to be the last thing I ever paint or it'll be the first thing that I paint. And so really it was the first thing that I seriously painted, because after that was, I think in the next year I had my first solo show, and yeah, went on to, I don't know, I think like quit my day job, which was working in an art shop, and the rest is kind of history. And so from there, a couple of years later, I moved to New York. I just felt like I wanted to have a few years out of Australia. That's turned into 7 years now. And probably, so I think I was in New York for about a year, and then definitely like one of the next sort of highlights of my career was being invited to India, where I painted as part of the first Indian Biennale. So this is some work from that. I did like about 5 pretty large street interventions as well as an exhibition. And I know the light's not good and it's hard to see, but you can see within this work, like I've always had the constant of using the geometric shapes to relate my work to ideas of interconnectedness and how we relate to the natural environment. And I also really think it's quite important as a visual artist and somebody who works in the public realm to leave space for your audience and the people who experience the work to also bring their own stories to the work and to kind of, it's a difficult thing and I don't even know how you explain how you do leave that space in your work, but I think it's really important. And one of the things I loved about this piece was that a lot of people felt like it was, like the image was like he was the soul of the building or like the spirit of the building, which, yeah, resonated quite nicely with me. And this is another piece. I became quite well known over this time for doing these metamorphic flying girls, again, made up of different shapes. And so this was in Kerala, in India, in Kochi. And then this is part of a larger mural. And I just wanted to like kind of bring it back around to how I would use the shapes that I was talking about earlier to start to create like landscapes and tie these elements together of the themes that I'm interested in my work, such as like metamorphosis, life, death, transformation. And so, yeah, after that, and at the same time as I've traveled and been doing festivals, the Biennale, lots of different projects, I've also had like a pretty steady studio practice, which is essentially probably really become my bread and butter. Like I'm constantly making paintings for collectors or different people who want them. And so this is an example that I wanted to show you of an early work where I moved, as I learned how to paint on the streets, I really moved from doing straight like stencil stuff into combining stencils with painting techniques and using like acrylic as well as enamel, mixed media. I mean, when I first started painting, I just bought everything from a hardware shop. I was too intimidated to go into an art store. So I've always just kind of used what's been around, and then as I moved further into my career and started a studio practice, that was when I started to experiment with using different paints. So this work is a combination of acrylic painting and spray painting as well. And looking at the ideas of, yeah, life and death, transformation, and you know, and keeping that thread going of the shapes and the shapes representing matter. And this is some more of my figurative work. Again, like, you know, bringing it back around to using those geometric shapes to represent particles and perhaps transformation, as well as like our dream states and subconscious and conscious realms. And what I really like about using these different elements and bringing them together is, I guess, like essentially what I'm really interested in is how everything is interconnected. And that was why, for me, it was really interesting to be given the topic of chaos, because once I started reading about it and researching it more, I was like, this really fits really nicely with my work, because that's one of the threads that's always constantly running through what I make is like looking at how are we connected to our natural world? How are we connected to each other? How do we have empathy with the other creatures around us? And also from a scientific point of view, like how do those particles that we're all made of, like how does that interact with each other, and how does that make us feel? And so when I started to read like more about chaos theory, and just also ideas of chaos, I was like, this is perfect. This is inspiring for me. And yeah, that's another studio piece you can move through. And I also wanted to talk about, I guess I feel like I'm giving you guys like a fast forward of like through some elements of my career, and there's so much different things I can talk about. But so I wanted to jump to a project that I just completed last year. This is in Utah, which was the largest mural that I've painted to date. and was 5 stories high, 200 feet long. And just how the elements of my work, how I've constantly woven it through everything that I do. So I guess I see my art practice and my oeuvre as being like one big story. So it's like you could look at my work in the gallery or on the streets or wherever, and it's all these different pieces that come together to form a larger narrative. So this was last year in Utah, in Salt Lake City, where I was invited to come and paint this wall. And I don't know how well you can see that, but this is like a very large boom lift. It's 120 feet high that I had to like stretch over 2 buildings to reach the wall at the back. So it was definitely like a chaotic experience. I arrived there and I don't have a license for that lift. And I joked to them, I was like, I'm not licensed to drive this. And they just laughed. And I was like, no, really, I'm not. And they didn't have harnesses for me. And it's 5 stories high. And I was like, I think I need to go to Home Depot and buy some harnesses. And it was terrifying. And the first time I got up there, the lift stalled and I was trapped and they had to get somebody to come down. And when I brought it in to the edge of the wall, I couldn't even see the base of the wall. So definitely painting large-scale murals around the world can be extremely chaotic and always challenging. And as an artist, I think it's really important to constantly push yourself and put yourself in those situations that challenge you. The first time I painted a really large wall, I think it was in New York, which is a wall that I did for Converse and Juxtapose, and it was 4 stories high, and I got there and I realized I had absolutely no idea how to paint this wall. I had no plan. I didn't grid it out. I just had like a couple of poles sticky taped together with a paintbrush on the end, and I literally just drew it. And I think back to that now and I'm like, was I insane? Like, what? I just didn't think about it. I was like, yeah, no problem, I can do this. And I think as an artist or a creative person, like that kind of fearlessness or stupidity is like, it really pushes you forward, because every time like I say yes to something that is kind of the impossible, like this wall, which I didn't even know how I was going to reach the other side, you just have to make it work. And from that usually comes something pretty extraordinary. I mean, at the end of the day, you feel pride in what you've achieved, but also you just have to get it done. And when it's really public, like something like this, everybody sees you, so you just actually have to make it work. And when there's no room for failure, there just generally isn't failure so far, touch wood. Yeah, so for this wall, it's been interesting in my practice to sort of form this different language and then my own symbols, and then figure out ways to relate that to different people as my practice has grown from laneways in Melbourne to bigger streets to Mexico to New York to all these different places that, you know, fundamentally include all these different people with different experiences. And as a public artist, the last thing you want to do is paint something that feels contrived or like you're talking down to people. You need to make something that people can invest in, that they can understand, without losing your sense of self. I think that's really important. So for this mural, which is like in the center of Salt Lake City, so it's right in the middle of Salt Lake City, which is a very interesting, bizarre place in America. It's where the Mormons are from. The entire city is constructed around the Mormon temple. But it also has like a really strong LGBTQ scene and some really alternative, surprisingly, arts people. But I was definitely like the weird artist in town for this job. So I wanted to, for my work, I was like, okay, I need to make something that is going to resonate and hopefully make people feel ownership over their city and proud to be there. And something that also is something that I think is important that I want to paint as an artist. So I chose to paint the flammulated owl, which in real life is about this big, but I painted him like 5 stories high. And I chose him because he's also an endangered species of the area. But he also has these like flaming feathers all around his eyes that are like multicolored. So I was like, that's perfect. It works with like what I'm all about. And then I created this, this like shattering crystal branch, which I went and visited the salt flats and looked at salt crystals and kind of thought again about like particles and matter and the tiny things that go up to make up the whole, and then painted that kind of shattering across the wall. And then inside the owl, I painted constellations, and these are the constellations that you can see in the night sky in Utah. So that was definitely like a highlight of recent times that fits all the pieces of chaos. It was definitely chaotic, but and challenging, but really rewarding as well. And so I guess this is something that I'm always trying to do within my work is I have like this, my own symbolic language that I'm working with and constantly developing and refining. And I definitely have like a desire to work in some abstract elements as well as geometric and figurative. So I'm always constantly trying to bring all of this together, which is quite difficult. But I think as an artist, that's what you do. You constantly push yourself and try to bring all the elements together that you want to talk about and do it again and again and again. And I don't know if you ever succeed, because maybe if you do, then it's like done. I'm always like, you don't want to make the perfect painting, because then what do you do after that? Have to find something else, a new job, I guess. So this is an example of a recent work that I painted in Melbourne, where I started to take the shapes that I've always used within my work and like kind of make them even more looser and playing around with scale. So here is this is a part of a very large mural that I painted in Rochester, upstate New York, as part of Wall Therapy, which is a really great festival. And this was probably the first time that the shapes really started to like take over my work and maybe my life at that stage. This wall was about 50 meters long. And I told the festival my idea. I was like, I really want to take like my shapes and go big and just saturate the whole space with it. It did have a figurative element at one end. And so one of the festival employees made me like this giant wooden stencil, and I spent like a week just covering the entire wall. And within that, I started to, working at this scale, like I would often think about how even within the shapes, like when I would look at my stencils close up, I would start to notice all the tiny splatter marks and how the textures within that, and how that then also relates to the ideas of like within quantum physics, and it was string theory and chaos theory of the particles that make up all matter at all scales. Excuse me. And so I guess in terms of my technique, I've kind of been also pushing like my mediums that I use, like using spray paint and using acrylic and using water and making the shapes even bigger and really mixing those colors together and making like drips and textures as part of my work, which is definitely something you probably shouldn't do in a traditional art sense, is like mixing mediums like this. And sometimes it works and sometimes it becomes like I don't know, the paint can like pull against each other. But I think that when you're a self-taught artist like I am, and when you learn your craft on the streets and in street art and graffiti, you're not as tied to rules. And so I think it's like important to remember that the rules are there to be broken, and just to keep like pushing whatever it is that you're doing and experimenting. And yeah, that's basically everything that I have to say. Yeah, I guess the last thing that I wanted to say, just to bring it back around to the topic of chaos, is that I had like read this great quote, and it was that if we can recognize the fractal, chaotic nature of our world, we can gain new power, insight, and wisdom, and within chaos, we might find our ultimate freedom. Thank you. I know, I've been doing it for so long that I forget that yeah. My color palette, I think originally it came from, I started looking at the colors in nature that the natural environment uses to signal danger, and looking at like a lot of rainforest animals, and then I picked some colors out of that because I knew it was really eye-catching, and when you're working on the street as well, it's like you want people to like see your work. And then I became interested in like, okay, if I put like pink next to yellow but I want to create form, will that work? And that was challenging as an artist. Now I use it more in like in the abstract and shape stuff, but in the beginning I was using it in my figurative stuff, and that was quite difficult, but it was really fun. So that's where it came from.
Okay, so 1, 2, 3. So you guys come and
All those socks are good.
afterwards, but we'll start with this. And Vex,
Want me to
repeat the question
Yeah.
for the video.
Yep. Okay, what's your question? Hi.
That was awesome. Really,
Thanks.
really interesting. Who inspires you most inside of art and outside of art?
Okay, so the question is, who inspires me most inside of art and outside of art? I don't know. That's a really hard question. I can't say that one person or thing inspires me the most. There's so many different things. I think any artist that isn't afraid to experiment and generally changes what they do. I'm really inspired by music, and I would have to say Bjork is an inspirational person for what she does, and I guess she's inside art. She's inside and outside, so that's my answer. Okay, who is next?
You've mentioned a number of times being a self-taught artist,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm really intrigued as to how you can share that, what that took for you to kind of put yourself out there, and why that's such a feature for you to mention for people that aren't trained and would love to step into creativity more.
Okay, so the question was,
What does it mean to be an untrained artist?
what does it mean to me to be untrained or self-taught? I guess it's, people ask me about my journey, or they're like, how did you get from A to B? And it's really, it's not like you just don't have that. You don't have that same pathway of going to like art school, leaving art school, looking for a gallery to support you, or some clients or some people, and then selling your work. I feel like very much as the type of artist that I am, like working with my background in street art, it really informs the way I make marks, because I use spray paint, I'm rough and ready, I trash brushes all the time, and I just use whatever I can find. And I guess being self-taught, it's like kind of looking outside of the norm, like if you want to push yourself, be like, okay, I'm going to make something, but I'm only going to use these 3 tools. It limits you, but it's like limiting but expanding at the same time. Does that answer your question?
Do you ever analyze your work mathematically and go, oh, I actually realize there is a magic angle number, like there's a number, I really like this particular angle, or it's all like subconscious, like you just know, obviously you're just using your eye, right? But have you ever kind of gone, oh, it's actually this angle?
I say the question was like, do I mathematically... A favorite number. Oh, definitely. I mean, yeah, definitely. Like, there's times where I wish I'd studied better at maths at school, because I'm like, I really do need to know trigonometry here. And yeah, like, I always like work in odd numbers. Also with like repetitive pattern making, I have to constantly remind myself to not be even, because it's interesting. It's like when you look at the nature of fractals, how it's like perfectly splits off. And I think naturally I'm inclined to do that. And I'll do that in my work and then realize I've repeated myself there, and it's all perfectly even. Then I'm like, shit, I have to go in and like change it because I don't like it because it's too perfect. So, but I mean, I don't know if there's an actual equation. I'd like one. That would be cool. Yes.
Can you explain the process of like creating those huge murals? Like, how do you start? Do you map them out on a computer, and then you figure out how much distance you need between each point, and then you go on the wall and you start sketching? And
Mm-hmm.
Like run, like I don't know, 3 miles back to see the whole picture and then go back close up and do it again. Like, how does it work?
Okay, so the question is like, how do I do the large scale murals, essentially? Um, so so my work is a combination. My figurative work is a combination of photography, collage, and drawing. So generally, I will find the image, or I'll take a photo. That is what I want to make, and then I usually will play around with that in Photoshop, or you know, however to figure out the contrast, to figure out the elements. And yeah, originally, as I was saying earlier, I really would attack a wall with no plan at all, except for a paintbrush on the end of a pole, and that's terrifying and doesn't usually lead to. I mean, it worked, but I was never completely satisfied. As I progressed, I learned how to grid, to like, you know, which is the traditional way of enlarging something, where you take the paper and you make the lines and then you do it on the wall and then you transfer it. At times I've used a projector if I need to get the rough shapes up there. I've also made my own marks on the walls with my shapes, and then take a photo, use an overlay. You kind of get a sense for it after a while. You sort of start small, and by the time you're doing something big, your gut tells you, okay, just do it there, and it's right. And then, yeah, I don't know, I'll paint for a few hours, I do get down, I walk back, I take a photo, I look at it, go back up, I fix what I'm doing. But I think you kind of, I've built up to it over 10 years of painting, so it's like I started small and just went bigger, bigger, bigger. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question was about leaving space for people to bring their own meaning, and how my work has been interpreted in different places, such as Mexico. Mexico's been a really amazing place for me. For a long time, people were always telling me I should go there, and how my work would really resonate, because, as part of my language, I talk about life and death, and I've painted a lot of skulls. And when I went to Mexico, I always had the most amazing time painting, because they have such a strong mural history with Frida and Diego, that, when I'm there painting, sometimes, like, if I've been painting in Australia, people come up to you and they're like, why are you doing this? Is someone paying you? What's the point? Like this. And you're like, okay. and I will be painting in Mexico, and people just come up to me and they're like, okay, so this is about blah, blah, blah. Or they thank you for the work, or they're really engaged, and they're not afraid of skulls, and they're not afraid of death. And I'm sure they're afraid of it, but it's a part of their culture. So actually went to Oaxaca and painted for Dias los Muertos, and it was an incredible experience, and it was so nice to be a part of that festival. And I painted the skull that I showed earlier with the big shapes flying down the street, it's really nice when you travel to different countries and you go somewhere, and people are just so welcoming and want to help you paint. And literally that's happened to me in Mexico. I was painting, and a guy lost his wallet, and he found it like under my scaffold, and he'd recently seen the Banksy film, and I was like, we started talking, and he was like, I can't believe I found my wallet. He was like, I was riding my bike home drunk, and it's fallen out here. And he's like, oh wow, you're painting a mural? And I was like, yes. He was like, I just saw the Banksy film. And I was like, oh, my hand's in that film, which is another weird story. And he's like, really? And he was like, well, this is a sign that I'm here to help you. And I was like, okay. And he spent the next like 5 days like helping me paint the mural, and he was amazing. I ended up staying at his house, having dinner with his mum, doing yoga classes with him, and it was an incredible experience. And the Mexican people are so open to creativity and art, that it was just like, it was a really beautiful experience. And at that time I really needed somebody to help me as well, because the wall was huge. And hopefully that answers your question. Was there a question over here? Okay. Anybody else? Pardon? So the question was, is there a level of respect between artists, as in not painting over other people's work? Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's very similar to graffiti culture. It's like if you... I mean, you can start a war with somebody by painting over their work, but if you paint something that's really good, I mean, it's something that pushes people within street art or graffiti to be good. It's because you have to be, otherwise you'll get painted over. But yeah, no, I've always found, especially like the scene in Melbourne was always really supportive. Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely lots of respect there. It's the international street art scene is a very small, tight-knit group of people that I think a lot of people don't realize that's not very big, and everybody really has each other's back and supports each other, which is great. Anybody else? Yes.
What's next for you? Like, where would you like to take your work? Is there any cities that you'd like to paint in particular, or where you'd like to take it?
So the question was, what's next for me, and is there any cities or places that I would like to take my work? So yeah, I'm in Australia for the next month, and then I'm going back to New York and back to Mexico, which I've been on the road since June, so I'm really looking forward to having a few months to just do some studio work. Creatively, I'm kind of like I'm limiting my large scale walls a little bit, like just trying to wind it back to 1 or 2 a year. I'm doing a really big one in Manhattan next year, which is also going to have like some augmented reality, which is exciting. And I'm quite inspired by that. I've also been making soundscapes and animations and more installations. So I kind of just want to take what I'm doing and expand it more into different mediums and technology over the next couple of years. Yeah. And where do I want to go and paint? I don't know. I mean, that's always the thing. It's like I'm like, I want to stay in my studio and work. And then someone's like, do you want to come to Italy? And I'm like, yes. And then I'm like, damn. I don't know. I know there's a lot of places I want to go in the world. Maybe Peru. I like finding interesting things to paint and in interesting places. Yes, I think so. I think Peru might be on the list. And Iceland. Kind of want to paint there, but it's also very cold. I don't like painting in the cold, so. Any other questions? Yes?
Could you say anything more about blending your studio practice with your street art or public art, and how you think about that?
How in terms of a business? So about blending my studio practice and my street art practice in terms of a business sense. I mean, I guess I don't know. I'm like I don't know if I'm the best person to ask that question.
Or even just in a creative sense.
Yeah, in a creative sense, I mean, I think it's important to give time to both things and not to, you know, if you want to have a studio practice and you want to be doing mural painting or doing public art, then you have to work on both and give time for both. I've always just been quite fortunate that people want to acquire my work and contact me and ask me to create work for them, and I do it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I don't have a business plan. I don't. I just work quite instinctually, and so far so good.
Guys, give me a huge round of applause. Actually, I had one last cheeky question. My last question is, if there's anyone in the room that's feeling a bit creatively blocked, like just like project stopped, not feeling inspired, what advice would you have, if any, or what do you do in those times?
Yeah, so I kind of actually in recent times, because I think everybody has a creative block. I think it's important to, I'm still always working on it. Like I would always beat myself up for like not working normal work hours, or like I'd go to my studio at 9 a.m. and sit there till 3 in the afternoon doing like nothing. But then I work from like 3 till midnight or 4 a.m. And so I think it's important, if you're experiencing a creative block, to just recognize when the time is right for you to create, acknowledge that and just do it, and who gives a shit? Like, if other people are working 9 to 5, if it's good for you to work 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., work then. And I also keep like a little list of music, podcasts. There's certain things that I listen to that always help me. And also for me, like walking or like riding the subway is like it always helps me process stuff. So whatever it is, like if it's like going for a bike ride, whatever helps you process, get out of the studio and just do it. Those are my tips. Thank you.